The oak was older than any map she'd ever studied, and the man standing beneath it looked like he'd been carved from moonlight and winter itself. Kiera Calloway had driven 3 hours into the rural heart of Somerset with recording equipment that cost more than her car, chasing a lead from a publican in the village who'd sworn the old oak on the Xeraphel estate granted truth to anyone who spoke beneath its branches. Folklore, naturally. The kind of thing her doctoral supervisor would call rich material, and her mother would call a waste of petrol. But ethnomusicology demanded field work, and if the locals believed strongly enough to sing about it, which they did, she'd heard 2 versions of the ballad already, then the tree deserved documentation. What she hadn't expected was the landowner himself, waiting there as though he'd known she'd come. He was tall, impossibly so, with hair the color of fresh snow that fell past his shoulders in a way that should have looked ridiculous, but instead looked deliberate, regal. His skin held the same alabaster quality, luminous in the dappled shade, and his eyes were the deep red-brown of garnets held to candlelight. He wore modern clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, but something about the way he stood made her think of portraits in manor houses, the kind where the subject stares down through centuries with amused superiority. "You're trespassing," he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd have expected if Winter learned to speak. Cold clarity with an undercurrent of something warmer. Though I'll admit, most trespassers don't arrive with a Zoom H6 and a Ryecoat windshield. Ethnomusicologist or documentary filmmaker? Kiera's hand tightened on her recorder bag. "How did you—" "I pay attention." He moved closer, not threatening but absolutely confident, each step measured. "And you're not the first academic to come hunting folklore on my land, though you might be the most determined. You walked right past 3 private property signs." "I had permission," Kiera said, lifting her chin. "The village council said—" "The village council," he interrupted, and now there was definite amusement in his tone, "doesn't own this tree. I do, have for quite some time." He stopped just outside what would be considered invasive distance, studying her with the kind of attention that made her skin prickle. "But I'm not throwing you out. Yet. Tell me what you're looking for, and I'll decide if you're allowed to find it." She should have been intimidated, should have apologized and retreated. Instead, she found herself annoyed by his presumption, which overrode her usual academic courtesy. "I'm documenting local folklore traditions. The oak has a ballad cycle associated with it, 3 versions, possibly more claiming it compels truth from those who stand beneath it. I wanted to record the tree's acoustic properties, interview locals about the tradition's origins, and test whether it works." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "Speak a lie beneath the branches and see if your tongue turns to ash. Folklore doesn't work that way. Doesn't it?" He gestured toward the massive trunk behind him, its bark rutted and ancient, branches spreading like a cathedral ceiling. "This tree has stood here for 800 years, maybe 9. Stories don't cling to places without reason. Miss Calloway. Kiera Calloway." She shifted her equipment bag. "And stories cling to places because humans need narrative frameworks to process their environment. The oak is visually impressive, unusually old, probably a gathering site for generations. The truth element likely stems from tribal councils held here, where oaths were sworn. Over time, the cultural memory transformed into supernatural belief." "How terribly rational." He extended a hand, and his movements had that same deliberate grace. "Orpheus Xeraphel. I own the land, the house beyond the ridge, and yes, this tree. And I'll make you a deal, Miss Calloway. You may record here as much as you like, interview whomever you please, and document to your heart's content. But first, you have to test your hypothesis." His hand was cool when she shook it, not cold, but definitely cooler than human standard. She told herself he had poor circulation. "Test it how?" "Tell me something true beneath the tree. Then tell me something false." His eyes glittered with challenge. "If you're right, if it's just wood and leaves and cultural memory, nothing will happen. You'll have your baseline recording, and I'll have my entertainment. If you're wrong," he trailed off, shrugging, "well, then your thesis needs revision." Kiera wanted to refuse on principle. She wasn't a performer for bored landowners, but the light was perfect, the location exactly what she needed, and turning back now meant wasting the entire day. Fine, but I'm recording this. Please do. She set up quickly, years of fieldwork making the process automatic. Recorder on its stand, windshield secured, levels checked. The oak's presence registered immediately on her meters, the way its trunk and branches created natural baffling, shaping sound into something focused and strange. She'd been right about the acoustic properties. They were remarkable. Orpheus waited with infinite patience, leaning against the tree as though it were an old friend. When everything was ready, Kiera stepped into the oak's shadow, directly beneath the heaviest spread of branches, and said clearly, "My name is Kiera Calloway. I'm 26 years old. I'm working on my doctorate in ethnomusicology at Oxford." Nothing happened, obviously. Orpheus nodded. Now the lie. She thought for a moment, then said, "I think folklore is a waste of time." The air didn't change, the tree didn't shudder. But Orpheus laughed, bright and genuine, and the sound made something in her chest flutter unexpectedly. "Oh, that's good. That's very good. Because if you truly believed that, you wouldn't be here at all, would you? You'd be in some library writing grant proposals and dying of boredom." "It was a test case," Kiera said, defensive. "Not a real, it was a lie," he interrupted, pushing off from the tree. "Which means either the tree's magic is nonsense, or you didn't commit to the untruth enough for it to register. Convenient for your thesis either way." He moved past her, close enough that she caught his scent, something like winter forests and old books. "Come back tomorrow. The light's better in the morning, and the acoustics shift depending on the sun's angle. I'll even make tea." "I didn't agree to come back." "But you will." He was walking away, heading toward a path she hadn't noticed before, half hidden in the undergrowth. "Because the tree interests you. And whether you admit it or not, so do I." He disappeared into the trees before she could form a response. Kiera stood there, recorder still running, and realized her heart was beating far too fast for a simple conversation with a landowner. When she played back the audio that night in her rented cottage, Orpheus's voice sounded exactly as she remembered, cold and warm at once, amused and serious, like a riddle wrapped in velvet. She told herself she was going back for the research. She went back every day for a week. Each morning she'd arrive to find Orpheus already there, either sitting on one of the oak's massive roots with a book, or standing in the shade as though he'd grown there overnight. He always had tea, real tea, loose leaf, in a proper thermos, and he always had questions. Not the usual ones about her work or her university, but strange, specific things. What did she think songs became after the last person who remembered them died? Did she believe music existed without ears to hear it? If a tradition survived only in writing, was it still folklore, or had it become something else? "You're very philosophical for a landowner," she said on the third day, adjusting her microphone placement to capture the oak's response to wind. "I have a lot of time to think." He handed her tea in a portable cup that was probably worth more than her recorder. "Occupational hazard." "What occupation? Besides managing an estate, I mean." "Oh, this and that," he waved vaguely. "Long-term investments, property management, watching the world change and trying not to get trampled by it." His expression shifted, something darker moving beneath the lightness. "Trying not to forget what matters." She wanted to ask what he meant, but he changed the subject, asking about her favorite ballad variant, and the moment passed. The interviews were easy to arrange once the locals realized Orpheus approved. They arrived in clusters, elderly farmers who remembered their grandparents singing the Oak Tree Ballad, a pub owner who'd collected 17 verses over 40 years, a school teacher who'd written a play about it that the children performed every harvest festival. Everyone had a version. Everyone had a story about the tree granting truth or punishing lies. And everyone spoke about Orpheus, or rather, about the Xeraphel family with a strange mixture of respect and affection that went beyond typical landowner-tenant relationships. "The Xeraphels have been here forever," one woman told Kiera, her gnarled hands wrapped around a mug of tea in the village hall where Kiera was conducting interviews. "Longer than anyone. They've always looked after us, always been fair. Strange family, mind you, keep to themselves mostly, but good people." "Strange how?" Kiera asked, keeping her tone neutral. The woman shrugged. "Just different. Old-fashioned in some ways, modern in others. But you always know where you stand with them. Not like these new money types who come and go." Another man, younger, added, My grandfather said his grandfather worked for the Xeraphels. Same family, same house. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Most estates change hands every generation or two, but not that one. It did strike Kiera as odd, but property records were notoriously complicated in England, especially for old families. Maybe the name passed through female lines, or cousins, or some legal trust structure. She filed it away as interesting, but not immediately relevant. What was relevant was the way Orpheus seemed to know every story before she recorded it, every variant before it was sung. He'd appear during interviews sometimes, leaning in doorways or sitting quietly in corners, and the locals would light up, include him in their memories, ask his opinion. "Is it true your great-great-grandfather planted the oak?" the schoolteacher asked him once. Orpheus smiled, that careful expression that never quite reached his eyes. "So the family stories go, though I think it might have been a few more greats than that." Kiera began to notice other things, too. The way Orpheus never met her during the afternoon, always morning or evening. The way his skin never tanned despite spending hours outdoors. The way he moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman in its precision. She told herself she was imagining things, that her folklore studies were bleeding into reality, making her see patterns that weren't there. But then came the evening he invited her to the house. "I have something to show you," he said after she'd packed up her equipment for the day. "Something relevant to your research, if you're interested." The house, calling it a house, felt insufficient, sat beyond the ridge, hidden by careful landscaping and old-growth trees. It was Georgian in style, all elegant proportions in weathered stone, but maintained with meticulous care. Lights glowed in the windows as they approached, warm against the gathering dusk. Inside was even more impressive: high ceilings, original plasterwork, furniture that managed to be both antique and comfortable. But what caught Kiera's attention was the library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, thousands of books in multiple languages, and on a central table, laid out carefully, were manuscripts. Old ones. "The Xeraphel collection," Orpheus said, watching her face. "Documents going back to the 13th century. Property records, personal letters, account books. And these," he gestured to the manuscripts, "are the earliest references to the oak." Kiera moved closer, hardly breathing. The vellum was genuine, the ink faded but readable. Latin first, then Middle English, then early modern English. References to "the great oak on the east field," and "the truth tree where oaths are sworn," and "the place where lies cannot hide." "This is incredible," she whispered. These should be in a museum or an archive. Do you know what historians could do with these?" "I know exactly what they'd do." His voice had gone cooler. "They'd take them away, lock them in climate-controlled rooms, and turn my family's history into a curiosity for scholars. These stay here. But I thought you'd want to see them. For your research." She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, not threatening, but definitely purposeful, as though her reaction mattered more than it should. "Why?" she asked. "Why let me see this? Why let me record here at all? You could have refused from the beginning." Orpheus was quiet for a long moment, his garnet eyes reflecting the library's lamplight. Then he said, "Because you listen. Really listen, not just to the stories, but to what's beneath them, and because—" He hesitated, which was the first time she'd seen him uncertain. "Because it's been a long time since someone looked at the things I care about and understood why they matter." The air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Kiera's academic brain told her to step back, maintain professional distance, but the rest of her, the part that had driven her into folklore in the first place, because she believed stories held truth that facts alone couldn't capture, leaned in. "Tell me about the oak," she said quietly. "Not the official history, the real story." His mouth curved, sad and amused at once. "I planted it," he said, "exactly 837 years ago, spring equinox just after dawn. I was different then. Younger in the ways that matter. I thought if I planted something, watched it grow, maybe I'd feel less—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter. The tree grew. I stayed. That's the story." She should have laughed, should have recognized the obvious fantasy, the eccentric rich man playing games. But she'd seen his hands on the oak's trunk, gentle and familiar. She'd watched him move through shade without ever stepping into full sunlight. She'd recorded his voice and heard the weight in it, the kind of depth that came from genuine time, not affectation. "You're not joking," she said. "No. That's impossible. Most things are, until they're not." He moved to the window, staring out at the darkened grounds. "You're a scholar, Kiera. You document traditions about magic and wonder, and you explain them rationally, scientifically. But what if some of them are simply true? Not metaphorically true or culturally true, but actually factually true?" Her heart was hammering. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the tree grants truth because I need it to. Because 800 years ago, I carved something into my nature that required a place where lies couldn't survive, where I'd have to face myself honestly at least once per season, or I'd forget what honesty felt like." He turned back to her, and his eyes were bright, almost glowing. "I'm saying I planted that oak as a reminder that some things should last, that permanence is possible even for people like me. People like you. Vampires, Miss Calloway. The word you're dancing around. Folklore and legend, and one of the few traditions that's exactly what it claims to be." The rational part of her mind was screaming that this was insane, that she should leave immediately. But her hands were steady and her voice was calm when she said, "Prove it." He did. Not dramatically, no fangs bared, or supernatural displays. Instead, he simply showed her documents with his signature spanning centuries, all in the same hand. Photographs from the invention of photography onward, showing the same face, the same white hair, the same alabaster skin. A locket containing a painting from the Renaissance, and the subject was unmistakably him. "I age," he said quietly. "Just incredibly slowly. Another 1,000 years and I might look 40 instead of 30. It's tedious, actually. Everyone comments on my good genes." Kiera sat down hard on a leather chair, her mind reordering everything. "The locals. They don't know. They know the family has been here forever. They don't question it too closely. People see what they expect to see, and I've been careful." He stayed by the window, giving her space. "Every few decades I die and my heir takes over. Same name, same face, same personality. Official records are easy enough to manipulate when you've had centuries to learn how. And the locals, they love the continuity. They love having a Xeraphel in the manor house looking after the land. It gives them stability in a changing world. And the tree is exactly what the folklore says. A place of truth. My truth, specifically. I carved promises into that bark for centuries, oaths I needed to keep, names I couldn't afford to forget. It became a living record of everything I've survived." His voice dropped. "And everyone I've lost." She heard the pain in those words, deep and old. "How many?" she asked. "How many what? How many people have you lost?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "All of them. Everyone I've ever cared about, eventually. Friends, lovers, allies. They age, they die, and I remain. It's the cost of this life. Connection always ends in grief." "Then why tell me?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why reveal yourself now? I could expose you, ruin everything." "You could," he agreed, "but you won't. Because you understand what stories mean, and you understand that some truths need protection." He finally moved away from the window, coming to sit across from her. "And because I'm tired, Kiera. So tired of pretending that permanence doesn't come with loneliness. You asked about the oak, about why the stories matter. They matter because they're all I have. Proof that I existed in ways that mattered to others, even if those others are gone." She realized she was crying, just a little, tears tracking hot down her cheeks. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming sadness of it. 800 years of survival, of watching everyone you love turn to dust. "That's horrible," she whispered. "Yes. I'm sorry." He looked startled, as though apology was the last thing he'd expected. "It's not your fault." "That doesn't mean I can't be sorry it happened." Something shifted in his expression, softening. "No, I suppose it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while, the library settling around them with small creaks and sighs. Eventually, Kiera asked, "Is it just you? Or are there others?" Others, not many in England anymore, but we exist. Scattered families, old bloodlines, some organized, some solitary. We have rules, territories, politics. It's tedious and occasionally dangerous, but mostly just bureaucratic. Immortality doesn't exempt you from paperwork. Despite everything, she laughed. The sound startled both of them. Orpheus's face broke into a genuine grin, transforming him from regal to almost boyish. There, that's better. I was worried I'd terrified you permanently. You did. I'm just coping with humor. She wiped her eyes, pulling herself together. I have about 1,000 questions. I have time, so she asked, and he answered. About blood, donated, purchased from willing suppliers, never taken by force. He was very firm on that point. About sunlight, painful but not instantly lethal, more like severe allergic reaction. About aging and injury and the mechanics of a life that stretched across centuries. He answered everything with patience and honesty that felt like a gift. When she finally left, well past midnight, her mind was spinning, but her heart felt strangely settled. She'd stumbled into something impossible, and instead of shattering her worldview, it had somehow made everything make more sense. All those stories, all that folklore truth wrapped in metaphor, waiting for someone to listen properly. She went back the next morning and the morning after, and suddenly her research expanded beyond the oak to encompass everything. Vampire folklore across cultures, blood mythology, immortality narratives. Orpheus helped, guiding her toward useful sources, correcting misconceptions with the weary patience of someone who'd heard every wrong version imaginable. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings beneath the oak, afternoons in his library, evenings talking until the stars came out and he'd walk her back to her car with old-world courtesy that should have seemed ridiculous, but instead felt cherished. She recorded everything, not the vampire revelations, but the folklore, the ballads, the local stories. Her documentation was meticulous, but the real research, the real discovery, was happening in the spaces between. In Orpheus's careful explanations, in the way he'd gesture while talking about the 17th century as though it were last year, in the growing warmth between them. Spring shifted into summer. The oak's leaves deepened to full green, casting shade that felt almost sacred. Kiera's project expanded and expanded, her supervisor delighted with the unprecedented access to local traditions. She didn't tell anyone about Orpheus's truth. That was his to share or conceal. But she thought about it constantly, about what it meant to live so long, to care so deeply, and lose so inevitably. About the courage it took to plant a tree knowing you'd watch it grow for centuries, carve names into it, knowing you'd outlive everyone whose initials you marked. One morning in late July, she arrived to find Orpheus sitting on the oak's roots with a knife in his hands, staring at the trunk. "What are you doing?" she asked, setting down her equipment. He didn't look up. "Considering an act of monumental stupidity." "That's ominous." "It is, rather." He turned the knife over, its blade catching sunlight that filtered through leaves. "Do you see those carvings, there and higher up on the eastern side?" Kiera moved closer. She'd noticed them before, of course, old marks worn by weather and time, some barely visible. "Initials," she said. "Lots of them." "Everyone I've loved," Orpheus said quietly. "Every person who mattered enough that I couldn't bear to lose them without marking it somehow. I started the tradition in the 14th century. A friend died of plague, and I carved his initials so there'd be proof he existed after the mass grave swallowed everyone. Then it became habit. Lovers, friends, allies, all here." He gestured at the trunk, and now Kiera could see dozens of marks, maybe hundreds, layered across centuries. "A memorial and a punishment. I come here and remember." "That's not stupid," Kiera said. "That's beautiful. The stupid part is that I want to add another set." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were full of fear and hope tangled together. "Yours." Her breath stopped. "I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "I know we've only known each other a few months. I know you're human and young, and you have a whole life ahead of you that doesn't involve a vampire with more trauma than sense. But Kiera, you've made me feel less alone than I've felt in decades, maybe centuries. You look at the things I care about and you understand. You listen. And I'm selfish enough to want to mark that, even though it means I'll watch you age and die and I'll be here, still with your initials on this tree and nothing but grief to show for it. Kiera's heart was doing strange things in her chest, expanding and breaking and mending all at once. That's the stupidest romantic declaration I've ever heard, she managed. He flinched. I know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. She kissed him, stepped forward, framed his face in her hands, his skin cool and smooth and real, and kissed him beneath the oak's branches while summer wind rustled leaves overhead and the tree bore witness the way it had for 800 years. Orpheus made a sound of surprise, then relief, then something deeper. His hands came up to her waist, careful and reverent, and he kissed her back with a desperation that spoke of too many years alone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was, his breath was more habit than necessity, Kiera said, "Carve them." "What?" "My initials. Carve them." She grabbed his hand, the one holding the knife. "You said it lasts 1,000 years, right? That's the folklore?" "Kiera, I don't care if it's stupid. I don't care if it's too soon. You've made me understand that folklore is just truth people aren't ready to believe yet, and the truth is, I'm falling in love with you. So carve the damn initials, make them last." His expression was pure wonder, fragile and bright. "You don't know what you're asking. 1,000 years, yes, but I'll be here for all of them, watching those letters weather and fade, watching you become a memory, and you'll have proof it was real," Kiera interrupted. "That's what you said about the others, right? Proof they existed? So let me exist for you, here, now. And for every century, you need to remember that someone loved you and it mattered." "You love me?" His voice cracked on the words. "I'm working on it," she said, smiling through tears. "Give me time." "I have plenty of that." He carved their initials slowly, carefully, into smooth bark on the south side where morning light would hit it perfectly. KC plus OX, enclosed in a heart that she drew first with her finger, tracing the shape for him to follow. The knife bit deep, peeling away bark to reveal pale wood underneath, and the tree seemed to sigh in response, settling. When it was finished, Orpheus set the knife aside and pressed his palm flat against the carving. "There. 1,000 years at minimum, probably longer. The oak is strong." Kiera covered his hand with hers. "Then we're part of it now, part of the story." "Yes." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "My story was all lost, Kiera. Centuries of it. You're the first thing in longer than I can measure that feels like something else." "Like what?" "Like hope." They stood there beneath the oak, hands joined over their carved initials, and Kiera felt the weight of what they were attempting. A human and a vampire, a lifespan measured in decades, trying to intertwine with one measured in millennia. It was impossible by any reasonable standard, but then, so was a tree that granted truth, and a man who'd lived through the Crusades, and folklore that turned out to be fact. Maybe impossible was just another word for not yet understood. The summer continued, slow and golden. Kiera finished her primary recordings, but found reasons to stay. Follow-up interviews, additional documentation, archival work with Orpheus's manuscripts. Her supervisor praised her dedication. Her mother worried she was spending too much time in the middle of nowhere with that strange landowner. If she only knew. The relationship deepened in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary? Dinners together, conversations that lasted until dawn, inside jokes and shared looks and the comfortable silence of two people learning each other's rhythms. Extraordinary. Orpheus teaching her to move silently through the forest the way he'd learned 3 centuries ago, demonstrating the precise control that made his vampiric nature both a gift and curse, sharing stories from eras she'd only read about in textbooks. He was careful with her, always, conscious of his strength, his nature, the inherent danger he represented. But Kiera wasn't fragile, and she made sure he knew it. "I'm not afraid of you," she told him one evening when he'd pulled back from a kiss, worried he'd been too intense. "Maybe you should be. Maybe you should trust me to know my own mind." She grabbed his collar, pulling him back. "I've done the research, Orpheus. I know exactly what you are. I want you anyway." Something in him broke open at that, and he stopped holding back quite so much. Not in dangerous ways, he was too old, too controlled for that, but in emotional ones. Let her see the depth of his loneliness, the scars from centuries of loss, the fear that caring for her would end the way everything always ended, with him alone and her gone. Then we make the time matter, Kiera said fiercely. However much I have, we make it count, and when I'm gone, you'll have more than grief. You'll have joy to remember, good memories, not just sad ones. You make it sound simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. She cupped his face, looking directly into those garnet eyes. Love me while I'm here. Let me love you, and trust that it's worth it, even knowing how it ends. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and whispered against her mouth, You're braver than anyone I've ever known. I'm stubborn, she corrected. There's a difference. Not much of one. By September, she'd unofficially moved into the manor. Her cottage sat empty while she spent nights in Orpheus's library, mornings beneath the oak, afternoons exploring the estate. The locals noticed, of course. Village gossip traveled faster than light, but they seemed pleased rather than scandalized. The schoolteacher winked at her in the market. The pub owner gave Orpheus a congratulatory slap on the shoulder that would have broken a human's bones. They've adopted you, Orpheus observed, amused. They've adopted us, Kiera corrected. You're part of the community, whether you think of yourself that way or not. He did think of himself that way, she realized. For all his isolation, all his careful distance, Orpheus cared deeply about the land and the people on it. He knew every farmer's name, every child's birthday, every family's history. He attended village events always at night, always briefly, but consistently. He donated anonymously to causes, maintained footpaths, ensured the estate remained accessible for traditional gatherings. He'd built a life here over centuries, and it was good. Autumn arrived with a crispness that made the oak's leaves turn gold and scarlet. Kiera's recordings were technically complete, her dissertation research more than sufficient. She should have returned to Oxford. She didn't want to. Stay, Orpheus said when she brought it up. Not forever, I know you have work to finish, but come back. Make this a base. You can write here, use the library, and He stopped, vulnerable. I don't want to lose you yet. We've barely started. I'm not going anywhere, Kiera promised. Oxford is 3 hours away, not another country. I'll finish the degree and then… She hesitated. What does a future look like for us? I need to know what you want. I want you here. No hesitation. For as long as you'll stay. I want mornings beneath the oak and evenings in the library and every moment in between. I want to watch you work, hear you laugh, argue with you about ballad variants and folklore methodology. I want… His voice roughened. I want to stop being alone. Then you've got me, she kissed him softly. For decades at least. We'll figure out the rest as we go. So she left for Oxford that October, but she came back every weekend, then every few days, then essentially lived between both places. Her dissertation took shape, a comprehensive analysis of the oak tree folklore cycle, its historical context, and its living tradition. She didn't mention vampires. That was Orpheus's secret, not hers to share, but she poured everything else into it. The work was brilliant, her supervisor said, publishable, career-making. Kiera didn't care about that nearly as much as she cared about getting back to Somerset, to the oak, to Orpheus waiting in the shadows with that careful smile. They settled into something that felt like forever, even though they both knew it wasn't. Then, in late November, the letter arrived. Kiera found Orpheus in the library, staring at a heavy envelope with a wax seal, his expression unreadable. What is it? She asked. Notice, he said flatly, from a development company. They want to purchase the estate. That's not unusual, is it? You get offers all the time. Not like this. He handed her the letter, and she scanned it quickly. Formal language, aggressive offer, emphasis on historical survey, and land assessment, and compulsory purchase possibilities if voluntary sale is declined. That sounds threatening. Because it is. He moved to the window, agitated in a way she'd never seen. They're not just developers. Look at the letterhead. Callum Holdings. That's a front for the Delacroix family, old vampire house, French originally, moved to London in the 18th century. We've had conflicts before. Kiera felt cold. What kind of conflicts? Territorial mostly. They believe in consolidation, buying up land, pushing out solitary vampires like me. creating zones of control. I've refused to sell to their proxies for 200 years. This is them escalating. He tapped the letter. They want the estate, but more than that, they want the oak. Why? Because it's a symbol, a landmark, and because they know it matters to me. His jaw tightened. They'd cut it down just to prove they could, to prove that nothing lasts, not even ancient trees, not even careful stewardship. It's a power play. They can't force you to sell. They can make things difficult. He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "The oak has my initials carved into it, all of them, centuries worth. If they survey the property, do a historical assessment, they'll find carvings that date back 800 years, all in the same hand. Along with property records showing a Xeraphel in residence for just as long, all with conveniently missing death certificates, all looking remarkably similar in photographs." Kiera understood immediately. Evidence of immortality. Evidence of identity fraud, at minimum. Grounds to challenge property ownership, inheritance claims, a legal identity. They could tie me up in investigations for years, force me to disappear and abandon everything. The estate, the land, the oak, all of it gone. "We'll fight them," she said it automatically, fiercely. "With what? I can't reveal what I am publicly, and without that, I'm just an eccentric landowner with complicated records. They have money, lawyers, political connections. And more than that," his expression darkened. "They have patience. They can wait me out, apply pressure, make my existence here untenable." "So we make our existence more untenable." Kiera's mind was racing. "We make the oak matter to more than just you. We make it matter to everyone." He turned to look at her. "How?" "Heritage protection, historical landmark status, community asset designation, all of it." She was pacing now, energized. "We document everything the trees age, its cultural significance, the traditions associated with it. We get the locals involved, make it their oak as much as yours, and we do it publicly, with enough attention that trying to cut it down becomes politically impossible. That will draw scrutiny to the property, to me." "So you hide in plain sight," Kiera argued. "You've been doing it for centuries. You're the eccentric preservationist, protecting local heritage. That's a story people understand and support. Let them see your dedication without understanding the true reason for it." Orpheus was quiet, considering. Then, slowly, he nodded. "It might work, if we're careful, if we move quickly. Then we start now." They did. Kiera contacted everyone she'd interviewed, explaining that the oak was under threat from developers. The response was immediate and furious. The village rallied, petitions organized, local historians consulted, environmental groups brought in. The schoolteacher mobilized her students. The pub owner started a fundraising campaign for legal fees. Within a week, there were protest signs. Within 2 weeks, a local MP had gotten involved. Within 3, the story had hit regional news. Historic oak under threat, community fights to save 800-year-old landmark. Orpheus played his part perfectly. The dedicated landowner refusing to sell, the custodian of heritage, the man who devoted his life to protecting the estate. He gave interviews, carefully scripted, always in evening, spoke at town meetings, provided access to his historical records, edited ones. The public response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, donations accumulated, and suddenly, Calum Holdings was facing not just one vampire's resistance, but an entire community's wrath. Kiera watched it unfold with satisfaction, but also worry. Because pressure attracted attention, and attention meant risk. Her worry proved justified when a man showed up at the manor one evening in early December. He was beautiful in the way Orpheus was beautiful, white-haired, alabaster-skinned, with eyes like chips of ice. He moved with predatory grace and smiled with cold amusement. "Orpheus Xeraphel," he said, ignoring Kiera entirely. "Or should I say, the entire historical sequence of Orpheus Xeraphels. I'm impressed. 800 years in one location without getting caught. That's dedication." "Lucien Delacroix," Orpheus replied, and his voice was pure winter. "You're not welcome here." "I'm not here for welcome. I'm here to make an offer." Lucien finally acknowledged Kiera with a dismissive glance. "Privately. Anything you say to me can be said in front of her." "Charming. You've developed attachments." Lucien's smile sharpened. "That makes this easier, actually. Here's the offer. Sell me the estate, including the oak, and I'll ensure your little human's research career flourishes beyond her wildest dreams. Refuse, and I'll make certain every irregularity in your property records gets investigated by people who ask inconvenient questions. The oak's carvings are quite damning. I understand. Centuries of evidence in one convenient location. You can't force a sale, Kiera said coldly. We've already started heritage protection processes. The oak is on track for landmark status. Lucian laughed. Landmark status can be challenged, delayed. Bureaucracies are remarkably malleable when you know the right people. And while you're fighting legal battles, I'll ensure that forensic dendrochronologists examine those carvings, that historians analyze the property records, that journalists start asking why Orpheus Xeraphel looks exactly like his great-great-great-grandfather's portrait. Why do you want the land so badly? Orpheus demanded. You have a dozen estates. What's one more? It's not about the land. Lucian moved closer, and Kiera felt Orpheus tense beside her. It's about principle. You've been a holdout for 2 centuries. Orpheus, an example of resistance to proper organization. Every solitary vampire who refuses to join a house points to you and says, if Xeraphel can remain independent, so can I. You're a symbol of defiance, and symbols need to be broken. So this is about vampire politics, Kiera said. Not development at all. Everything's about politics, human. Your lover has simply been too idealistic to accept that. Lucian turned back to Orpheus. You have 1 week to decide. Sell or face exposure. And don't think your little community uprising will protect you. I can wait out mortals, they age, they die, and eventually I get what I want. Can you say the same? He left before Orpheus could respond, vanishing into the December night. Kiera and Orpheus stood in the manor's entrance hall, the threat hanging between them. He's right, Orpheus said finally. I can't outlast him, not without losing you, losing everyone here. Even if we win this fight, he'll come back in 50 years, 100 years, when everyone I care about is gone and I'm alone again. Then we make sure you're not alone, Kiera said fiercely. And we make sure the community is strong enough that it doesn't matter if individual people age out. We build something that lasts longer than 1 generation. How? She thought for a moment, then smiled. We tell them the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Orpheus looked horrified. Kiera, no. If I'm exposed, not exposed, protected. She grabbed his hands. Listen, we gather the people who matter, the village council, the farmers, the families who've been here as long as you have, and we tell them there's something you need to share. Something that explains why the oak matters so much, why you've protected it for so long. And then you show them the carvings. All of them. The centuries of initials, the history carved into bark. You tell them it's a memorial to everyone your family has ever cared about, going back to the beginning. They'll ask questions about dates, about how that's possible. So you tell them the Xeraphel family has a tradition of immortalizing memory in the tree, that every generation adds to it. You don't say you're the same person, let them assume its lineage, but you make them understand that the oak is a living memorial, a record of care and loss that spans centuries. You make it personal. Orpheus was silent, considering. Then, and if they don't believe me? If they think I'm insane? Then we have the historical records to back it up. We have the carvings themselves, dated by experts. We have the tradition, the folklore, the ballads. We have everything except the one truth that would make it all click into place, and that truth they'll supply themselves. She squeezed his hands. People want to believe in continuity, in dedication, in love that outlasts death. Give them a story they can believe in, and they'll protect it. He studied her face, and slowly, wonder replaced fear. You're brilliant. I'm a folklorist. I know how stories work. They organized the meeting for 3 days later in the village hall. Everyone came. The council, the farmers, the school teacher, the pub owner, elderly residents who remembered their grandparents' stories, young families who'd recently moved in. The room was packed. Orpheus stood at the front, and Kiera could see how much courage it took. He'd spent 800 years hiding, and now he was choosing vulnerability. Thank you for coming, he began. I want to talk about the oak and why it matters, not just to me, but to everyone the Xeraphel family has cared about since we came to this land." He explained the tradition, how his ancestor had planted the oak, how every generation since had carved initials into it, remembering friends and loved ones who'd passed. He showed photographs of the carvings, close-ups that revealed the depth and age of them, the careful preservation. He talked about loss and memory, about the need to mark love in permanent ways. "The oak is a memorial," he said quietly, "to everyone my family has lost. Hundreds of people across centuries, plague victims, war casualties, people who died of old age or accident or illness, all of them carved into bark that's outlasted their bones, their graves, everything except the fact that they were loved." The room was silent. Then the elderly woman who'd spoken to Kiera months ago stood up. "My grandmother's initials are on that tree," she said. "I remember her showing me, saying the Xeraphels had honored her father after he died in the Great War. We thought it was just kindness. But this," her voice thickened, "this is more than kindness. This is proof they mattered." Others nodded, murmurs of recognition, remembered stories, connections made. The schoolteacher spoke next. "My students did a project on the oak last year. They found 17 sets of initials from the 19th century that matched up with names in the church records, people who'd worked on the estate, people who'd lived in the village. We couldn't figure out why a landowner would memorialize tenants. But if it's a family tradition, if every Xeraphel has continued it, it means they've been watching over us for centuries," the pub owner finished, "looking after the land and the people on it, caring." Orpheus looked overwhelmed, his eyes bright. Kiera stepped up beside him. "The developers want to cut down the oak," she said clearly. "They want to erase this memorial, this history, so they can build something profitable. They're threatening to drag Mr. Xeraphel through legal challenges if he doesn't sell. They're banking on bureaucracy and exhaustion, winning out over sentiment." "Then they don't know this community," someone called out. Damn right," another voice agreed. The pub owner stood. "We protect the oak. We protect the estate, and we protect the Xeraphels because they've protected us. That's what neighbors do." The room erupted in agreement. They organized that night legal fund expansion, media outreach, political pressure campaigns. Someone suggested getting the oak formally listed as a war memorial, since it commemorated war dead. Someone else proposed a heritage trust to ensure the estate remained intact. Ideas flew, passionate and practical. Orpheus listened with visible emotion, and when people finally started leaving, offering handshakes and pats on the shoulder and promises to fight, he looked stunned. "I didn't expect that," he said quietly when the hall was empty except for him and Kiera. "You should have." She leaned into his side. "You've been part of this community for centuries. Of course they'd protect you." "I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "I've spent so long thinking of myself as separate, as other, that I forgot what connection means." "You didn't forget. You were just afraid to hope." She kissed his cheek. "Hope's terrifying, especially when you've lived as long as you have, but it's also what makes things worth fighting for." The fight lasted 3 months. Callum Holdings pushed hard. Legal challenges, property assessments, media campaigns painting Orpheus as an obstructionist, wealthy landowner standing in the way of progress. Lucien Delacroix appeared occasionally, always with veiled threats, always with cold confidence. But the community pushed back harder. The oak received preliminary heritage protection in January. A full historical survey was conducted, carefully supervised, to ensure no inconvenient questions arose about the carving's dating, and declared the tree a site of exceptional cultural significance. Environmental groups highlighted its ecological value. The local MP made it a signature cause. By February, the story had national attention. Community saves historic Oak David, and Goliath battle against corporate development. Kiera coordinated much of it, using her academic credentials and media contacts to ensure the narrative stayed focused on heritage preservation, not vampire politics. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, organized demonstrations. She became the public face of the campaign while Orpheus worked behind the scenes, rallying supernatural allies, calling in ancient favors, ensuring Lucian's political connections were quietly countered. It was exhausting and exhilarating. And in March, they won. The Heritage Committee granted the oak full landmark protection. The estate was designated a community asset, protected from compulsory purchase. Killam Holdings withdrew their offer, citing changed circumstances. Lucien Delacroix vanished back to London, thwarted. The village celebrated with a festival beneath the oak. Music, food, children playing, elderly residents telling stories. It felt like a medieval fair, joyful and communal. Orpheus and Kiera stood slightly apart, watching. "We did it," she said softly. "You did it," he corrected. "I would have hidden or fled. You taught me to fight." "We fought together." She took his hand, lacing their fingers. "And now the oak is protected. Your history is safe. You're safe." He turned to her, and his expression was raw with gratitude and love. "For how long? Lucian will return eventually. Or someone like him. I'll face this again in another century. Another 2 centuries. Then we make sure the protection lasts," Kiera interrupted. "We establish a trust, a foundation dedicated to preserving the oak and the estate. We involve the community in its governance, so it's not just you defending it. We build something institutional, something that outlasts individuals. You've thought about this." "I've thought about a lot of things." She hesitated, then said, "I defended my dissertation last week. I'm Dr. Calloway now." His face lit up. "Kiera, that's why didn't you tell me immediately? We should celebrate." "We are celebrating. This is the celebration." She gestured at the festival around them. "And I've been thinking about what comes next. For me, for us." He went very still. "What did you decide?" "I want to stay," she said simply. "Here, with you. I've been offered academic positions, but none of them matter as much as this place. As you. I want to establish the trust, oversee the estate's heritage preservation, continue documenting local traditions. I want to build a life here. You'd give up your career? I'd build a different one that matters to me." She stepped closer. "Unless you don't want that. I know immortality and commitment don't always—" He kissed her, deep and claiming and full of relief. "I want that," he said against her mouth. "I want you here. Every day I have you. I want to watch you work and argue with you about folklore and fall asleep with you in the library. I want God, Kiera. I want everything." "Then you've got it." They sealed it that night, standing beneath the oak while the festival wound down around them. Orpheus pressed his hand over their carved initials, KC plus OX, still sharp and clear, and said, 1,000 years. I promised you that. "And I'll give you every year I have," Kiera replied, "which hopefully is a lot. Modern medicine is very good." He laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I'll take however many you can give." They established the Xeraphel Heritage Trust that spring, with a board composed of local representatives and preservation experts. The Trust's mission, protecting the oak, maintaining the estate, and documenting the region's folklore traditions. Kiera became its first director, Orpheus its primary funder and advisor. The locals embraced it enthusiastically. Children took field trips to the oak, learning about its history. Researchers came to study it carefully, with Orpheus's supervision. The estate opened for seasonal events, became a gathering place. It became what it had always been, but officially, the heart of the community. Years passed. Kiera published her dissertation, then a book, then several more. She became an expert in vampire folklore, ironic, given she was sleeping with an actual vampire, and used her position to subtly correct misconceptions, honor traditions that held truth. Orpheus slowly relaxed into visibility, not complete exposure, but something closer than he'd allowed himself in centuries. He attended village events openly, contributed to local causes, let people know him as more than a distant landowner. They built a life together that was both extraordinary and deeply ordinary. Mornings beneath the oak, evenings in the library, nights tangled together in the massive 4-poster bed that had witnessed centuries of Xeraphel history. They traveled sometimes always to places Orpheus knew, layers of history visible only to someone who'd lived through them. They argued about research methodology and laughed over dinner and made love with the desperate sweetness of two people conscious that their time was borrowed. Because Kiera aged and Orpheus didn't. Not noticeably. She turned 30, then 35, then 40. Lines appeared at her eyes, gray threads in her dark hair. Her hands developed the first hints of weathering from years of outdoor recording work. Orpheus remained exactly as he'd been the day they met. They didn't talk about it much. What was there to say? They'd known from the beginning how this would end. But when Kiera turned 45, she brought it up. I've been thinking about the future, she said one evening, curled against him in the library. Dangerous pastime. I'm serious, she traced patterns on his chest. I have maybe 30 years left if I'm lucky, 40 if I'm very lucky and genetics cooperate. After that, I'll grieve, Orpheus said quietly. And I'll continue, because that's what I do. It's what I've always done. Will you carve someone else's initials into the oak? Eventually. He was silent for a long moment. Then, I don't know. I've thought about it, whether I'd even want to try again after you. The loneliness was bearable before because I didn't know anything else. But after this, after you. His arms tightened around her. I genuinely don't know if I could survive watching someone else age and die. You might be my last attempt at connection. It should have been flattering. Instead, it broke her heart a little. That's not fair to you. Living the next 800 years alone because you loved me? Nothing about this is fair, Kiera. But it's worth it. You're worth it. He kissed her temple. Don't borrow sorrow from the future. We have now. Let's live in it. So they did. On Kiera's 50th birthday, Orpheus took her to the oak at dawn and showed her something he'd carved on the highest branch he could reach. "KC light of my twilight years." You don't have twilight years, Kiera protested, crying and laughing at once. You have millennia. Before you, everything was twilight, he said simply. You brought the dawn. She kissed him there, beneath the tree that had witnessed their entire relationship, and thought that if this was all she got 20-some years with a vampire who loved her enough to carve her name for eternity, it was more than most people ever found. At 55, Kiera started training a successor for the trust. A young woman, bright and passionate about preservation, who reminded Kiera of herself. Orpheus approved her immediately. She'll look after things when I can't, Kiera said. When we can't, Orpheus corrected. I'm not doing this alone. If you retire, I'm retiring with you. We'll grow old together, relatively speaking, and leave the trust in good hands. You can't grow old. I can slow down, stop trying to manage everything, let the next generation take over. He smiled. I've been working for 800 years. I'm due for a rest. They made it to 63. Kiera had a stroke in late autumn, sudden and devastating. She survived. Orpheus ensured she had the best medical care money and vampire influence could arrange, but the recovery was slow. Her left side weak, her speech slurred. She raged at the unfairness. Not enough time, never enough time. Orpheus held her through it, patient and constant. We knew this was coming, he said gently. Bodies fail. It's not a failure of will or love, it's just biology. I wanted more years, she whispered. I know, so did I. He kissed her forehead. But we had decades, Kiera, decades of joy. That's more than I ever expected to have again. She recovered enough to come home, to spend her days in the manor with nurses and Orpheus hovering. She couldn't walk far, but he'd carry her to the oak on warm days, settle her against its trunk where she could touch their carved initials. Still there, she'd say, tracing the letters, still lasting. Another 800 years at least, Orpheus always replied. On a clear day in December, with snow dusting the ground and winter sun slanting through bare branches, Kiera asked him to take her to the oak one more time. He bundled her in blankets, carried her easily. Vampiric strength meant she weighed nothing to him, and settled her in her favorite spot. It's beautiful, she said, her speech clearer today than it had been in weeks. Thank you for bringing me here. For all of this. Thank you for staying, Orpheus replied, kneeling beside her, for fighting for this place, for teaching me that connection is worth the grief. Is it? She looked at him seriously. Will it be after I'm gone? He took her hand, pressed it over their initials. Yes, because I'll have proof you existed, proof you loved me, and that will matter for every century I continue. Promise me something, Kiera said softly. Promise you'll try again. Maybe not soon, but eventually. Promise you won't let me be your last attempt at happiness. Kiera. Promise, because 1,000 years is too long to spend alone, and I can't bear the thought of you hiding here, grieving forever. You have too much life left. Use it. He was crying, scarlet tears tracking down his white cheeks. "I promise, someday, when it hurts less." "Good," she smiled. "Content." "I love you, Orpheus Xeraphel. All 837 years of you. I love you, Kiera Calloway, every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful moment of you." She died 3 weeks later, peacefully, in the manor house with Orpheus holding her hand. He grieved as she'd known he would, deeply, privately, with the weight of centuries making it both easier and harder. He'd done this before, survived loss before, but not like this. Not someone who'd known him completely and loved him anyway. The funeral was massive. The entire village came, along with academics she'd worked with, students she'd mentored, people whose lives she'd touched. They buried her in the small cemetery beside the church with a headstone that read, "Dr. Kiera Calloway, folklorist, preservationist, beloved. She made stories matter." Orpheus stood through it with the same composure he'd maintained for centuries, accepting condolences, thanking attendees. Only when everyone left did he return to the oak, press his forehead against their carved initials, and let himself break. He carved a longer inscription beneath their initials that night. "KC, she taught me to hope, she was my dawn, 1990-2053. The dates would raise questions eventually, but he didn't care. Let people wonder. Let them speculate. Kiera deserved to be remembered accurately. Time passed, as it always did. The trust continued its work, thriving under new leadership. The oak remained protected, a landmark visited by thousands. Orpheus stepped back from public life, becoming more shadow than presence, but he stayed. The estate was his, the oak his responsibility, and he'd promised Kiera he'd keep both safe. Years became decades. The 22nd century approached, and slowly, carefully, Orpheus began to heal. Not forget, never forget, but heal. He reread Kiera's books, listened to her recordings, traced their initials whenever he needed to feel close to her. But he also started attending village events again, contributing to the trust, engaging with the new generation of locals. He kept his promise. On the 80th anniversary of Kiera's death, a blink for him, but long enough that the acute grief had mellowed to sweet sorrow. A young researcher approached him at a trust event. She was studying vampire folklore across cultures, she explained, and she'd read Dr. Calloway's work extensively. Would he be willing to discuss the local traditions? She understood he'd known Dr. Calloway personally, and any insights would be invaluable. Orpheus looked at her earnest, passionate, ready to chase stories into the unknown, and felt something he hadn't felt in 80 years. Not replacement, not forgetting, but possibility. "I'd be happy to," he said, "though I should warn you the stories are stranger than you might expect." She grinned. "I certainly hope so." They walked together toward the oak, and Orpheus caught himself smiling. Kiera would approve, he thought. She'd want him to continue, to connect, to live. And he would. For her, for himself, for all the centuries still ahead, because the oak would stand for another 1,000 years, their initials carved deep, and he'd promised to make that time matter. He intended to keep that promise. 20 years after that conversation, Orpheus married again. A historian this time, someone who understood the weight of the past and the importance of preservation. They had a son first, named Ivo. Then 5 years later, a daughter, Seelin. Both human, both bright and curious, both raised knowing their father was different, special, someone who'd lived through history. Orpheus taught them about the oak, about the carvings, about the importance of memory. He showed them Kiera's initials and told them stories about the woman who'd saved the tree, saved him, saved everything that mattered. She was brave, he told them, and stubborn, and she believed some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Ivo touched the carved letters carefully. "Did you love her?" "Very much." "Do you still?" "Always." Orpheus looked up at the oak's canopy, gold with autumn. "But love doesn't run out, Ivo. It just grows. I loved her, and I love your mother, and I love both of you. Hearts are bigger than people think." Seelin climbed onto his lap. "Will you carve our initials too?" "Someday," he promised, "when you're older. For now, you get to watch them grow." He pointed to fresh carvings he'd made recently, his new wife's initials, and small marks for both children. "The tree holds everyone I've loved. It's a family now." They grew up beneath that oak, played in its shade, learned its stories. And when they were older, they joined the trust, continued the work, ensured that what Kiera had started would last. Orpheus watched them with quiet joy, conscious that he'd eventually lose them too. Humans aged, humans died, but grateful for every moment. Because Kiera had been right. Connection was worth the grief. Love was worth the loss, and the oak stood witness, its trunk covered in 800 years of initials, proof that some things lasted. On the 1000th anniversary of the oak's planting, the village held a celebration. Orpheus attended with his family, white-haired and ageless as ever, watching generations gather beneath branches he had watched grow from sapling to colossus. Someone asked him to speak, and he stood in the oak's shadow, looking up at centuries of growth. "This tree has stood here for a millennium," he said quietly. "It's witnessed plague and war, love and loss, countless lives beginning and ending, and it will stand for another millennium, God willing. Because some things are worth protecting. Some things matter enough to fight for, to carve into permanence, to ensure they last beyond our individual lives." He pressed his hand against the trunk, over the spot where KC plus OX was carved. The letters were weathered now, worn by 100 years of exposure, but still visible, still clear, still lasting, just as he'd promised. "To the oak," he said, raising a glass, "and to everyone who stood beneath it, may we all leave marks that matter." The crowd echoed his toast, and Orpheus felt Kiera's presence like sunlight on his face, warm, bright, and enduring. She'd taught him to hope. He'd learned the lesson well, and the oak stood strong, its branches full of leaves and light, a testament to the fact that some loves, some stories, some promises really could last 1,000 years.